So having set everything up ready in advance in RevMan, I'm now going to go back to Covidence and I'm going to export some CSV files that are going to include the data that I want to import. Now, depending on your review and whether you want to bring risk of bias 1 data into Covidence, into RevMan, sorry, and whether you have custom data or not, you'll be importing between 3 and 5 CSV files. So the minimum files you'll be bringing in are study information, study arms, and study results. And then the optional files are the risk of bias 1, and the custom data. So custom data are data that don't easily fit into RevMan analysis. And I will show you what that looks like. You might have data that's median values, for example, interquartile ranges. But what Covidence does is we export all that data for you. So all the data that you've captured will be exported so that you know that you have it and you don't forget that it's somewhere else in a different file. So I'm going to show you now how to export that data. So again, I'm just going to pop out of the slides and back into Covidence. So this time I'm back in the export section. And this time I'm going to select the export to RevMan web. From here, you click on the blue export RevMan web files. The files get downloaded, and as you can see here, I've got files for study information, study arms, the results. I do have some custom data, so that's been exported. And I've also completed the risk of bias assessment and risk of bias 1. So that's here as well. So you click on each of the download buttons and save those files. Again, I've done that in advance to save some time. Then go back to your RevMan review. But in fact, I'm just going to show you what's really important to do before you come back to RevMan is to make sure that you've really checked those files. So I've got the files open here. I'm just going to take you through them so that you know what their CSV files look like, but also kind of emphasizing the importance about making sure that everything matches in Covidence and RevMan to prevent those errors. So this is the study information export. This has, this has all the columns for methods, characteristics, the participant characteristics, and so on. And it also has that identification column as well that we added. The next file that you can see here are the study arms. So in this particular export, all of the interventions are listed in the intervention column. These are now all automatically populated for you. Please make sure that each of the interventions matches everything in RevMan. If RevMan has a capital C for vitamin C and you have a small c here, there'll be an error message. It's just triple checking that everything matches. If there are extra spaces, there'll be an error message. So make sure everything matches correctly. We also export ARM data for you as well. So this is the data and the intervention as it's reported in the study. And I'm just going to very quickly go back to Covidence and show you what I mean by that. So study arm data. So this is a study that I've got that I'm about to extract data in extraction 1. When I go to the interventions, I can identify here the interventions that I've got. So in this review, I've got vitamin C and control. And down here in my table for interventions, I've also got vitamin C and control listed. And those will appear in that intervention column. Now in Covidence, you can add more detail here about the intervention itself so that you can capture the data as it's reported. So for example, with the vitamin C, some studies might report it as ascorbic acid, and you might want to write that information down, or it might be that there's a specific dose. So here I can now add in a specific dose, and if I had more than one dose, I can add in another column. As is reported in this study, so they have 50 milligrams and 500 milligrams here. So now I can add that in. Now, when this data gets exported in that CSV file, the intervention column will have vitamin C and control, but it will also have these specific arms, so the 500 milligrams and the 50 milligrams. So that is what that specific CSV file looks like with these arms here. So the important side to focus on is interventions and make sure this matches RevMan. The next file here is the result data. Let's take a look at that. It's important here, again, to match all of the outcomes with the outcomes in RevMan. Again, any additional spaces, additional symbols, characters are all going to cause problems when you bring the data in. Make sure that all the data looks good and that you can't see any obvious errors there as well. Risk of bias, so this is risk of bias 1 output. Again, make sure that there's no missing information there, that something just hasn't been skipped through as you were going through consensus. And this last file is some custom data. So this is what the custom data output looks like. Tells you the study and the intervention, and you can have manually entered in. In this case, I put in some median values and interquartile ranges. So this is data that won't automatically go into RevMan, but that Covidence exports for you, so that you can either manually enter it into RevMan or you can use it in a narrative synthesis as well. So those are all my files, and going back to RevMan now. Okay, and now I'm going to bring those files in. And to do that, I need to go back to the dashboard. And this time I'm going to come over to the right here and click on Import Study Data. And now I can bring in each of those files. So I'm going to bring those over. I'm going to bring in the study information. Study arms. The results. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring across the custom data and show you what happens if you bring across data that RevMan can't process. So I've brought that's median values. So I've got some errors appearing here. Data type not recognized. So RevMan won't be able to bring that data across. So instead, I'm going to bring across the correct data. and then my risk of bias 1 data. So you can see now I don't have any errors appearing on the right-hand side here. If you do get errors there, you just need to go back to the files and try and identify if there's a difference in the spelling or the spacing, for example. And I'm going to import the data. So these are just validation issues that have appeared on the right now. They haven't prevented the import at all, and I can see that my import's complete. So now all the new studies that were in the CSV files from Covidence have now successfully come across to RevMan. And that's brought over all of the study characteristics, the results, and the risk of bias data. Anything that I've removed from the CSV files won't come across to RevMan unless the data was already in RevMan. It won't overwrite it. It will, bringing these files over, will update all existing files within RevMan. And you'll now be able to go ahead and create your analyses. So I'm just going to show you what the files look like in RevMan now. I'm going to go back to my included studies. So now when I open this reference, it's brought over all, automatically populated all of that information for you, all of those characteristics, including the identification section that we set up. And it's brought over risk of bias 1 for us. So again, we get the reference has come over. We can see all of the characteristics are there in the characteristics sections. It's brought over the study arms that are being reported in this particular study, the individual data for each outcome in this particular study, and the risk of bias assessment as well. If I look at the analyses, I set a couple of analyses up, or an analysis with some outcomes earlier. So now I can show you the number of colds. This is about vitamin C preventing colds. So all 4 of my studies came across. I've got the effect estimate calculated, and if I click on the investigate sensitivity button, I can see the forest plot with the risk of bias assessment there. So I've also got the same, this is for continuous data, I've got mean differences here. Again, I can see the forest plot associated with that. We also wanted to show you that custom data. So this is about, but you have to manually enter this if you wanted to enter it into RevMan. So I've got some data, a table set up here that allows me to enter the median and the interquartile range data that I had captured in that CSV file. And I can add data row, and I can select the study that came from the drop-down list. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because setting up analyses is all within the RevMan knowledge base. But I just wanted to show you that particular feature. So we can add an analysis. Instead of automatic, for custom data, you need to select manual. For the data type, we need to select other. And that's going to take me to a different section where I can select the number of columns that I want. And then when I swap over to the data section, so that we're currently in options, I swap over to data. I've got the columns here, so I can add the headings. and so on. So you can see, just add the column headings, and then you'll be able to add your row data as well, add in your study information. So again, all of that information on how to set up those analyses are going to all be within the RevMan knowledge base. You can also check the figures. So again, because the data has all been brought over and automatically populated, you'll be able to create figures very easily within RevMan. So you've got a forest plot there. To add figures, you can simply click on the Add Figure button here. You have a list of options. So I might want to add the risk of bias summary. So that figure's then added, and then I can link that in as I prepare my review. So I'm just going to go back to the slides one more time. So that's how easy it is to bring the data over, and then you can start all your analyses. But there are a couple of things that Covidence doesn't support that I just want to kind of emphasize for you. You can't currently use risk of bias 2 in Covidence. So we only support risk of bias 1 at the moment. That will be changing. So if you're using risk of bias 2 for your specific review, you can use Covidence for all of the screening and for the data extraction. And then you can use the RevMan tool itself to populate your risk of bias 2 data. As you've seen, Covidence doesn't automatically import custom data. So any additional data that you have that doesn't fit with the RevMan processes and analyses, you need to manually import into RevMan. But we will export the file for you from Covidence. We don't currently support direct reference import. So just bringing across those CSV files won't automatically populate the included studies or excluded studies for you. So that's why when you're planning everything prior to starting the imports, you need to bring over the reference file. So that references, you select the included studies and export that file first of all. And we don't automatically populate subgroup data for you as well. So you can make changes to your CSV file. So if you had, if the intervention at the moment is vitamin C, you can change the CSV file so that it's vitamin C low dose, vitamin C high dose, for example. But again, you must make sure that that's also set up exactly the same in RevMan. And there's more information in the RevMan knowledge base about setting up subgroups. So just a couple of frequently asked questions that we get. We get asked about time points. So how are time points handled if I've added them into Covidence? So if you've added a time point into your template in extraction 1, we will export the data for you, and you will see that in your export file, you get the number of, this example, number of colds at 6 weeks as a time point that you entered. If you want to look at analyses and outcomes specifically for those time points, you need to make sure that they're set up in RevMan as well. So again, I'm just going to pop back to RevMan for you and go to review criteria and outcomes. So here you can see when I set up the outcomes for this review, I've added in specific outcomes for time points that interest me. And then when I go to the analyses, I set up a specific analysis that was just for the 12-week time point in this example. And so for this, I can see that just 2 of the 4 studies reported this particular data at 12 weeks. So the time points, you can definitely look at time points. You can bring the data over. You just need to make sure that all the outcomes are set up correctly. And sorry, this slide may appear a bit blurred on your screen. You might get an error message that says we're having trouble saving your changes. So this error message sometimes appears. You might think that your CSV file is okay, but there may still be spaces that are separate. There may be additional characters. You might have hashtags in there that RevMan can't process. There might be characters themselves in there in the data that have come across. There might be a manual data error, entry error. So you might have a negative number where there shouldn't be one, for example. So you'll get that error message. So go back, look at your files, see if you can find the solution. And if not, you can click on the report the problem link or contact Covidence support or Cochrane support. And indeed, in terms of where you can get help from, so both Covidence and RevMan have support on importing the data into RevMan from Covidence. You can contact us at the support team at Covidence and support@covidence.org. There's also Cochrane support, and we both have knowledge base pages. So the Covidence knowledge base page will be specifically about exporting the data from Covidence into RevMan, and the RevMan knowledge base page is obviously the comprehensive guide to the whole product itself.